Well, to put it lightly, a historic week in politics from President Trump's second inauguration to the wave of the executive orders he has signed.
Joining us to discuss it all, WGN political analyst Paul Lisnek. It's Politics Friday, after all.
Exactly. I think every week's going to be historic, but we'll see how it goes.
Yeah.
Within the last hour, Pete Hegseth has been approved by the Senate, but not without a couple of issues.
Right. Mitch McConnell, I don't know if he surprised people, suspected he might vote no.
Yeah.
He was a no vote. That wasn't enough. They needed 4 to knock him out. He was the third. It required Vice President J.D. Vance to show up and cast a vote. The second time in history that a cabinet member had to be approved by a vice president. Anybody remember what the first one was?
2017.
Mike Pence for Betsy DeVos for education. Yeah. Exactly. Yeah.
And then, but Susan Collins and Lisa Murkowski also were against it. And what was it? Tom Tiller.
No, it's Carolina.
Tom Tiller. I almost said Tuberville.
Right, yeah.
Yeah, he had some questions.
He did, but he said that he talked to Hegseth for a couple of hours today and put those issues to rest. So he is the new head of the Pentagon.
What do you think about the rest of his cabinet nominees?
Well, this Thursday is going to be really interesting. That's a popcorn day because it's going to be RFK, Tulsi Gabbard, and Kash Patel. All those hearings on those days. Those are the toughest ones. Everybody else will likely just get through. These are the ones to watch, and probably the TV coverage will probably go with RFK, and we're showing him now too because he's the most high profile. But all 3 of them are critical. I mean, Kash Patel running the FBI, who wrote a book with a enemies list in it, people he's going to go after, those kind of things. I mean, if it was a movie, you'd call it drama, but that's stuff that they truly have to address.
About as critical as the vote that we saw tonight. Do you think do you look at this differently, that the confirmations next week, are they more likely now because of what we saw tonight?
Well, it's a good question. On the other hand, if you know that Mitch McConnell is a no vote, did that empower anybody? Here's the thing. Joni Ernst would have been the no vote to turn this down tonight. And apparently, from all reports, she was put under tremendous pressure.
Didn't she write a letter saying that she would go ahead and vote for him?
It was a change. Well, she issued a statement, but that was a change that she came out when she had a lot of questions. The pressure that the White House is putting on these Republicans. Here's what some have said: if this was a secret vote, and just kind of write it down, you don't know who voted who, it would not have passed. So these are people who are bending to the pressure. I understand it, pressure from the White House. They have primaries coming up. We see where it comes from. But it raises the question whether cabinet votes should be private secret votes.
All right, let's talk a little bit about the immigration issues, especially today at Hamline Elementary. People were on guard. They were scared to death. They even went on soft lockdown there because they thought ICE agents were coming to deport kids at the school.
But they weren't.
It was secret agent instead. Secret agent.
Secret
Service agent.
Service.
Secret agent, man.
Right.
Secret Service agents instead. But this is going to be a problem here in the city.
Well, look, Trump has issued an order that churches, schools, none of this is off limits. So they can show up anywhere. They can show up at any time. His borders are. Tom Homan has said they're going to do this. So, again, this shouldn't be surprising anybody, right? I mean, he ran on the border security issue. That he's coming through and moving it fast. We've talked about this since the day of the inauguration. This is what people need to expect. So for anybody who's experiencing some shock and surprise that he's doing this, I kind of say, why? This is exactly why people voted for him, who voted for him, and this is where we are. And so there was another state, of course, where they're using military planes to send these folks back. I know Mexico is apparently arranging for detention centers. They know that they're coming, and Trump is, on that issue, being true to his word.
On immigration, the court did give Trump a loss where birthright citizenship was concerned. Everybody knew that this ruling was going to come, but what was your thought about what Trump was trying to accomplish? Was it just him, playing to his base?
So, well, all of it's playing to his base for sure, and keeping promises kept that he said that he would keep. But that being said, he's also, if you will, experimenting with the power of the executive branch. Look, what he tried to do, what you're referring to, Ray, is he literally tried to call unconstitutional the Section 1 of the 14th Amendment. Can't be done. The judge in Washington State literally said, never had an easier case than this one.
Yeah.
What he did was completely unconstitutional. But you know what? Let me play con law professor for a moment. It'll get challenged. It'll work its way up through the courts. It is possible that it goes to a Supreme Court one day who looks and says, well, the original intention of this law was to deal with the children of slaves when people were brought from Africa against their will, and that was what created it. Now, since then, there have been cases that extended it to other areas and other aspects. But does this Supreme Court potentially look and say we consider those unconstitutional? It's possible. I doubt it, but it's possible.
Wouldn't you have to get an amendment to the Constitution to change it?
Well, I mean, that would be one way to do it, but this way would simply be the court stepping in and deciding that the meaning of that provision was only to refer to a certain period of time in the past, and then you wouldn't need a constitutional amendment.
We saw Trump today in North Carolina and then in California. Yeah. We showed those images here. But for him to issue this threat that he is going to dismantle FEMA, what would you do in its place to answer the disasters that all the experts say are going to continue and elevate?
I'm going to suggest that the thinking out of let's get rid of FEMA is not very well thought out. First of all, FEMA steps in when a local municipality can't handle the disaster they're dealing with. This was Katrina. These are the massive things. This is not the little flood down the street. So his comment today that what he'd like to do is get rid of FEMA, which, by the way, he cannot do. That would take an act of Congress. But that states should handle their own problems. Can you think of one state? Look, we live in Illinois. The tornadoes that we get in various areas, where Governor Pritzker has to declare disaster areas and seek federal help. States don't have that kind of money. And keep in mind that much of the money that goes to the federal governments come from the states like Illinois, California, who put far more into the federal budget than they get out of it. So what's supposed to happen? We cut out FEMA. We say, sorry, states, you're on your own. Find the money. You're going to have states going, we're not giving you money, federal government.
But what is his point behind that, do you think?
Well, I think what he's trying to do is put pressure on governors and states to perhaps be more responsible in what they're doing. That would be kind of an academic purpose. I think part of it, too, is that he may be thinking of, remember, he's made a promise, or at least through DOGE, through Elon Musk and formerly Vivek Ramaswamy, they're going to cut the budget down by $2 trillion, right? Which, of course, they're not, because even Musk himself said, well, maybe we'll get to $1 trillion. But I think maybe he's thinking about how do you cut the funds down. Although, you know what's interesting on that, since I mentioned DOGE? The executive order he signed creating DOGE this week didn't talk about its purpose of being to trim the federal budget or trim the deficit. Its purpose is to expand our role in IT. That has nothing to do with the reasons Elon Musk and Ramaswamy created that.
Speaking of just the idea of the executive order, I think during his first presidency, I think there were 4 executive orders that he signed within the first couple of weeks. But this is the shock and awe meant to overwhelm the system. Do you see it as a method of distraction? What is the thinking?
Well, I think a lot of his promises made, so he's going to try and keep them. I think, secondly,
fast.
He's been in that office before. Well, this is not new to him, right? It was new 8 years ago. Now he kind of knows what he's doing. All this stuff was ready to go and prep when it was ready to go. But I do think it may not have been conscious, but I think it's a consequence of doing so many executive orders so quickly that a lot of things fall through the cracks. Like there's one, people may or may not know about it, where he said there will only be 2 genders recognized, male or female. People are like, okay, whatever. Except what that triggered was Secretary of State Marco Rubio today having to issue an order that anybody who was applying for a passport, where an option on a passport is male, female, or you can put X, which is not to declare, he ordered those applications held up and not issued because can't do that anymore. It's got to be sex declared at birth. Well, that's, of course, a comment about the transgender community. There's so much time, but that didn't get as much attention maybe as it should have because everybody's too busy looking at all this deportation stuff.
I want to ask you before we go, what do you think was his motive behind stalling the civil rights cases? You saw Ben Crump the other day saying it makes people think that there's one America, justice for one America, and different justice for another America.
So, and I've trained the Department of Civil Justice with DOJ, so I know those people and I know how they think, and they are about sort of righting the wrongs, if you will. You can fill in the blank, right? He stepped in to say, stop your investigation, stop what you're doing. He's also, part of that is because he's removing people from DOJ. He doesn't want people who have been there before in those positions again.
So he'll replace people?
Well, he wants his own people in there.
Making some of the cases go different ways?
Or dropping them or not pursuing them. That's kind of what he's about. But it's sort of interesting. Something, again, I can say is my history with DOJ. Part of what you're doing when you remove all these people who have a lifetime career in DOJ, that body of history that people bring in, that's how these organizations continue to function. Because it's somebody who has the lifetime memory. I've been here 30 years. I've been here whatever years. That's how it moves along. You remove all of those people and you put in a bunch of new people and they're floundering. But what they're all doing, of course, is waiting for their orders from the top.
A few seconds left. One of the executive orders with the pardons for the January 6 participants. Yeah. J.D. Vance, the vice president, had suggested just days earlier that it should be a case-by-case basis. But then Trump comes out and gives clemency to everybody. Does that signal to you that he is just sort of flying, at the seat of his pants here?
So we can only know by what is reported. First of all, by the way, what J.D. Vance said was that people who committed violence should not be pardon. So what you have there is a blanket pardon for a lot of people. Trump didn't even seem to recognize exactly who got him or not, but they all got let out. The message it sends is real questionable because violent people are set out, and they're not just going home and not doing anything. Some of them are, this is our time, we have to go after the people who went after us, that kind of thing. People who have security protection, like Anthony Fauci, the president's removed that. It's a different sort of vibe that's happening and getting created all over.
What's coming up on
Dangerous
your show?
for a lot. On Sunday morning, we're going to explore some of these things again, as you might expect. I'm going to be joined by criminal defense attorney Gal Pazetsky. We'll be talking about the Mike Madigan case. We didn't even get to that one
Right.
today.
So much.
Well, next week, because the jury will have it next week. And Professor Rob Shapiro, who will be a constitutional expert, will talk about the immigration, birthright citizenship issues and all of that. We'll have a little debate about
How
that.
do you think
Thanks.
it's going to go?
Madigan, you know what? I once predicted the OJ verdict, and
Oh.
they were gone for, well, they were only gone for 3 hours. And when you're gone for 3 hours, that suggests a prosecution verdict. F. Lee Bailey took me down on the air. Yeah, it wasn't.
Thank you,
I'm making
Paul.
no predictions.